let's see what this software does. Slim face, this seems interesting. Let's pull that way down. Whoa, no way. That looks a little crazy, but look at that. It's like a liquefy for the face without having to go in there and actually use the liquefy tool. Hey guys, this is Patrick Hall with Fstoppers.com, and recently on our channel I had a debate with photographer Pi Jerza on the state of photography, and the title of that video on YouTube is Photography as We Know It Dying? And basically one of the ideas in that video was this idea that in the past photographers really valued the craft of getting images right in camera, and it seems now photography in some ways has changed more to graphic art. And some people debate which one's right, which one's wrong. I personally feel like the final image is all that matters, but it is an interesting debate nevertheless. And one area in this conversation that we had that I think is really interesting is, will software in the future start to replicate many of the skills that we needed to know out on location, such as lighting, such as skin retouching, such as sky replacements, such as overall contrast? Could you have software that could really give you a finalized image with just a single slider? And the reason I'm making this video today is Skylum recently released Luminar 4, and with this editing software, they are claiming that they have implemented a bunch of AI or artificial intelligent modules that will allow the photographer to spend a lot less time in post and a lot more time shooting. So the reason for today's video is I want to actually open some images in Luminar 4, images that I would probably take into, say, Photoshop to retouch, and see if their new AI sliders can actually save me a lot of time, and more importantly, can they do a job as good as what I would do if I was using other software. Let's get to it. All right, so here we are in Luminar, and I've picked a bunch of different images from my portfolio to test some of these new AI features. The first one that I'm curious to look at is AI structure. Now, the idea behind this filter is that you may want to sharpen certain things in an image, but you don't want everything to sharpen. So say you take a picture of a portrait, you may want the hair and the background detail to be nice and sharp, but you probably don't want the pores of the face to be sharp, but you may want eyelashes and that sort of thing to be sharp. Here is an image on their website. You can see it's a very shallow depth of field. The idea with this is with one slider, perhaps you could bring more detail to the boy up here mixing, the cookie dough, while not really affecting some of the background elements. So I'm going to try two different images on this. The first one that I have is one of my favorite shots that I've ever done of New York City, shot from a helicopter. This was a dusk shot. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over here to AI structure, and it literally has two buttons. It's got an amount and a boost. So let's take this down first and see what it does. You can see in one direction, here's the original file here, if I push this down. Now I've sharpened this to try to bring out as much detail, and this was shot at a really high ISO because I'm shooting at dusk in a helicopter. So these type of images, they always have this sort of appearance. It's just the nature of shooting at night in a helicopter. It's a pretty tricky environment. So I sharpened everything to try to make this look as good for print. And I've actually printed this as a 2-foot by 3-foot acrylic print, and it looks amazing. If I add the minus structure, you can see it really removes a lot of noise, and in many cases it makes the file look a little cleaner, but it's a little less sharp. So instead I'm going to go up. Let's take this to just 50. That's halfway up the structure level, and let's toggle this on and off and see what it does. Now instantly you can see how much more detail there is throughout the photo. Now for an image like this, I don't think I want a lot of detail way in the background because this was shot probably at 2.8 or f4. But with the subject so far away, there is a huge amount of depth of field, but I don't want it to be hyper sharpened. So what I want to do, let's come here to edit mask. We'll add I think a gradient mask would be good. Let's drag this gradient mask out. Maybe something like this. And now when I click the before and after, you can see the top part of the image isn't being affected at all. But the bottom clearly, it has a lot more punch here, but the proof in the pudding is going to be zooming in and to see how much noise is added by using this effect. So let's start zooming in here. Let's go back to the top of this hotel, and let's do the before and after. And you can see it's sharpened more than even I sharpened the image, but it doesn't seem to be global. And the whole idea with artificial intelligence is this should be sharpening the image in some places and pulling out detail in others while ignoring spots where it might be problematic. And I actually think this looks pretty good. Let's scroll up here to the top. Let's look at the H&M sign. And I also want to look at some of these areas where haloing might be a problem. And as I toggle this on and off, I really think that this adds a little bit to this image. Now, you got to remember this image I've edited quite a bit. So the change here isn't night and day, but if this was straight out of the camera, I do see where it's pretty impressive what this thing can do. And it's not adding a ton of noise or haloing. And if I toggle this on and off, you can see how much sharper and better it made the image look, especially at this size for web. Let's pull up one more image. This was an image that I shot for the competition where I lost to Lee and Pi. This was an outtake, but I thought this would be an interesting image to try this on. Let's come back to structure and let's bump this up to 50 again. And you can see what it does here as I toggle this on and off. It's really sharpening and bringing a lot of detail out on this wall. I really like the rustic wall. I know a lot of people online disagreed with me and I lost this competition, but I think it's pretty cool. That still might be a little much. Maybe I want to come down to like 27. That's a pretty nice effect. But what this should be doing, if it's really doing this with artificial intelligence, is it should be bringing a lot of detail out in the building, but not bringing out a lot of detail, say, on the model's skin. So let's zoom in here and see exactly what is going on as I toggle this on and off. And it's hard to say what other software would do in this sort of situation. But I can tell over here, kind of this gate, it's bringing a lot of detail back in the gate. Some of this dirty facade here, it's making that much more punchy and it's bringing the detail out in the stucco or whatever this is. But on her skin, especially if I look at her nose and her eyelashes and everything, it doesn't seem to be doing anything to her face. There is a little bit of shadow that it's pulling out on that side. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what this effect is doing. It almost feels like it's the clarity slider, which I typically like at maybe 10 or 20%. But in many cases, the clarity slider starts to add a lot of haloing, and then on people's skin and face, it doesn't look good. So if I zoom into this again, click this on and off, I don't really see any of that haloing effect. If you look at her hairline up here, it almost seems like that's completely untouched. But I do like what it's doing to all this detail over here. It just makes everything pop. Now, I do like what this effect is doing. I can't really pinpoint exactly what it's doing. It feels like it's doing some sharpening and some contrast. It feels like there's multiple things happening. And in my mind, as someone who spends a lot of time in Photoshop, I'm thinking, okay, this is at least 3 different adjustment layers, and then I'm going to have to brush out that effect in certain areas to prevent it from spilling onto my subject. So I believe that this is more complicated to do in a program like Photoshop, but you probably could refine it a little bit better. But that being said, the fact that you can just slide one slider and it is doing a really dynamic effect that I think is probably 3 effects in one without degrading the quality and the detail on my subject's face, I think this could be really handy if you're someone who does not like to spend a lot of time in post-production, but you still want to give your images a look. You want to make them pop, especially if you're publishing online to, say, your website or to Instagram. I could see where this would save you a lot of time. Now, the next tool that I want to look at is probably one that I use a whole lot more than this structure AI slider, and that is the AI sky replacement. Luminar 4 is the first software, as far as I know, that is claiming you can automate your sky replacements and not have to go in there and mask everything. So let's try a few of these images because this is something I use all the time. The first image I have here is a rock face down here right behind our house. You guys have probably seen this in many of our videos, but as you can see, the sky was absolutely boring the day that I shot this photo. So let's come down here to this little palette, and they've divided things into essential. Basically, essential is your light, where you can adjust things like you would have in many other softwares. AI adjustment, structure adjustment, color detail, all of that sort of thing. But then down here under creative, they have some other really dramatic looking effects. One of them is the AI replacement. So let's click on that. And the first thing we need to do is actually choose a sky selection. Now Luminar 4, it looks like it comes with a handful of different skies. It would be really nice if they had little thumbnails or something so you can see what these look like. But let's choose one. Let's go with Dramatic Sky 3 and just see what happens here. It is processing the image, and boom, look at that. It has dropped the sky in. And while the sky color isn't quite matching, obviously the water is very blue. Let's zoom in here and see what this thing did. It actually did a really incredible job. If you look, what I'm looking at here is this ridge line, and this is where you would see a lot of haloing if you've ever replaced skies. Getting a really natural selection on this can be difficult, although I will say this image is the easiest image because the sky is cutting out the rock face and the rocks are very sharp. So this is going to be the easiest example that I have. Looks pretty dang good though. I don't think that's the correct sky. So let's come up here and let's do maybe Sunset 2. Let's try a different sky that they include. That's not going to work either because the sun is setting behind this rock face, and I know the sun was actually setting to the left, so I want a sky that matches the actual scene. Let's go to Sunset 3. Same sort of thing. This is never going to look natural because it's not the way the natural light was in the scene, so you're going to have this haloing effect just because of where that is. Let's go to Sunset 4. This doesn't look horrible, but again, the sun is never setting behind our subject matter. Otherwise, this rock face would be black. So let's try Bright Blue Sky 3. Now this one's interesting because if you look at this and you say, where's the light coming from in the sky? It's definitely coming from up above and to the left. And that's exactly where the light was coming from in my actual frame. The sunset was setting on the left. And then if I turn this on and off, you can see we had a very dull sky here that's kind of a blue hour-ish. This is daytime, so maybe it doesn't quite fit. But if I zoom out, and especially if I look at this thumbnail over here on the left, I don't know that I would say that that sky has been replaced. But let's see, if I come over here to load a custom sky, this is actually going to allow me to choose my own sky. I don't have to use these free skies that Luminar includes. And recently, Fstoppers teamed up with Mike Kelly to do a whole sky library where he gives you over, I think it's 200 different high-res sky files that you can use in your own photography. Let me go ahead and open that up. And as you can see, we have these organized in a bunch of different folders. You can choose from blue hour, golden hour, and then inside these folders, we have clear, full, and scattered. Now the one I want to use here is, I'm going to use this golden hour scattered file. And you can see here what it's done. I think this is pretty believable because the sun sets to the left and it's got a similar mood to the overall vibe of this picture. And if you see here in my file, there's some islands up here in the skyline, and so I obviously don't want those to show. So I'm going to bring the horizon position down just a bit. Maybe somewhere like that. Not exactly sure what Sky Global does, but when I pull it to the right, you can see it starts to make these white waves a little gray. I definitely don't want that, so I'm going to bring it down to the left, and that brings back our white. And then Relight Scene is interesting because it seems to play with the color toning. And if I pull it to the right, I'm getting a lot more warmth. And if I pull it to the left, it's adding those blues in. So because we have some warm light up here in the sky, I think I want to pull this to the right. And that's going to add a lot more of the warm colors in the scene, which I think blends in a lot better. Let's come down here to Advanced Settings. And down here, I can start to control the exposure on my landscape. So here I might want to bring up the exposure on the landscape just a bit, something like that. I can also increase the contrast or decrease the contrast. Pretty awesome, I have to say. But if you're like me, you know that cutting this out in Photoshop would be extremely easy. I don't know how much time this is actually going to save for an image like this. Let's go to something a lot more complex. Here's an old wakeboard shot that I did off of a boat, and you can see I have a pretty good sky here, but let's go ahead and change that. Let's come down here to blue sky. I don't know, let's just do blue sky 3. Look at that. So you can see in my shot the sky might even be overexposed a little bit, but by adding a new sky in, it doesn't completely change the mood, but it does give a better sky in my opinion. Now where this is going to struggle is going to be around these trees. So let's zoom into the tree line here. And let's see if that horrible haloing will come in, which is pretty common when you start replacing skies. And I have to say, this is passable. Like, this looks great. I don't know that I would see this image and think like, oh, they replaced the sky at all in this. It's like the blues from the sky are fading into all these little gaps here, which is the problem areas. I also don't see any of the sky covering the trees. Let's scroll up here and see what it's doing to our wake border. There is a little bit of artifacting right here on the tow rope, the ski rope. And also because if I do the before, you can see there's some splashes that are coming off here that are backlit, and it's kind of masking over those. I don't think you would notice that because you wouldn't even know that the splashes are missing, but maybe it takes away a little bit. But it fades in really well down here. I mean, you still have some of those little particles of water being backlit. You're losing some of them in the sky, but then down here, it's actually preserving those as well. You can see the cutout right here, but the way that that appears, I don't know that you would think that's where the sky replacement is. It's not a straight line. It's not a soft brush. It's actually this jaggedy, selection, which kind of fits what the clouds are. So if I just showed you this image, I don't know if I would go right down here and say like, that's where the cutout is, but pretty impressive. Let's try one more image, and let's really make something difficult. Now, looking at this image, especially compared to the other two, this would be an extremely difficult sky replacement because we have these palm trees that are going to have a lot of color and detail in between each leaf, but because they're out of focus, this was shot at a pretty shallow depth of field, you can't easily select these, right? If I wanted to cut them out, they're nice and sharp. I could come in here with a pen tool and cut them out and replace them, and it'd be very easy. Even this ridge line, although there's a blur there, it's out of focus because of the depth of field, still relatively easy. But when you start getting up into these trees and the leaves and everything, this would be an absolute nightmare. I would actually never consider even replacing the sky, but let's put this to the test. Let's come up here, and because this is the similar location as the first shot, and I know the sun is setting to the left, let's pick the exact same image we had before, Golden Hour Scattered 5. Now this is one of my images from our sky replacement library. That looks pretty good. Now obviously, let's turn this on and off. You can see that it is adding some contrast and overlay on their faces. That needs to be repaired. But the sky itself looks pretty good. So let me just zoom in here. And let's look around these trees and see. We see very little artifacting. I can look at this palm leaf here. You can see that before there was a little bit more leaf, where now some of that has been masked out. But I have to say it's masked out in a way that looks natural. Let's go over here to the tree line and the coastline. You kind of lose a little bit of the trunk of the tree, and maybe this tree looks a little rough. Kind of turns a little cartoony. But everyone's attention is going to be up here. If I turn this on and off. So I have to say this looks pretty good. The one thing I definitely want to do is erase this darkening effect on their face because the AI didn't grab that. So let's go to Edit Mask. Let's hit Brush. And then I'm going to turn this up to opacity of, I don't know, like 90. And let's go to Erase, and now I'm just going to paint out that effect. Maybe make a small brush here. Paint that out. And now if I do before and after, you can see maybe there's still just a little bit on him. That looks pretty incredible. So before I move on, what I want to do is I want to see if I can make a sky replacement using much more complicated techniques in Photoshop and get the same effect and not have to use Luminar 4 at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sky file. I'm going to throw this on top of our picture here. We will just kind of rough this in, something like that. Let me turn that sky off for now. And then I'm going to go over to channels. Now there's many ways to select your sky to try to replace it. This is probably the mid-level when it comes to complexity. It's not the most extreme, but it's also not the easiest. When you're in channels, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for one of these channels that has the most separation between the sky and the foreground. And what that's going to represent is I want all of my foreground to be as black as possible, and I want my sky to be as white as possible. Now, from experience, just knowing the difference between red, green, and blue, the sky is almost always blue. And if I select this layer, you can see here, the tree and the palm tree is almost completely black. Our subject is pretty dark. The rock face and everything is gray. This is going to be the one that's going to make the easiest selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. Going to select it. I'm going to come up here to adjustments, and I'm going to go to levels. And if I'm moving really quickly here, there are tons of tutorials, including tutorials from Mike Kelly and from Elia Liccardi that you can find the fstoppers.com/store, where they go through this in very complex situations. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to crush everything to pure black while making my sky as white as possible. So something like this is a pretty good mask, because you can see my sky is almost pure white, and then everything that's black is going to be preserved. So I'm going to click that, hit OK. I'm going to come down here. You can see how complicated this is. I'm going to hit Load Selection. I'm going to highlight everything back. I'm going to go to Layers, and I'm going to apply my selection now as a layer mask by hitting the Add Layer Mask. And what you can see, it's not too bad. Let me hit Alt and select my layer mask. And what I want to do here is I just want to paint out any of the area that might be affected, like their skin tones, obviously her dress. I don't want the sky showing up on the dress. The water is not a big deal because you probably would have some color from the sky fading into the water. Alt, let's click this again, and now you can see I can turn on my sky layer, and you think, well, man, that looks pretty good. I can unconnect it from my mask, and I can move my sky around freely now and put this exactly where I want it. And then what I can also do is I can select all of this. Let's put this in a group, make sure that this file is inside of that. And what's nice with the folder is that I can actually add a gradient mask on here, and I can play around with where the sky blends into this image without messing up this layer mask. So I could do something like that if I wanted. But let's try to keep it as close to what it was with the Luminar. Something like that is pretty good. Now, here's the moment of truth. Let's zoom into this thing. And let's zoom into 100%. This horizon line looks pretty good over there. I don't think that that would call too much attention. A little bit of haloing here. I could probably refine that mask a little bit, you know. I still have a similar issue with this tree that I had in Luminar. But you can see Photoshop, it's definitely got a blue line around that palm tree. The tree trunk is completely gone. Luminar, it's definitely not as bad. I think that looks a lot more natural. But here's where I think I am going to fail. Let's move up to this palm tree. And here's where things just start to get weird. Making selections behind these palm leaves is incredibly difficult, and you can see just how razor sharp these are. It just doesn't look all that natural. And then behind her hair, you can see all this haloing right here. You can also see a really sharp haloing line right here on this palm tree. See what Luminar did. I don't see much haloing at all around her hair. There's definitely no haloing line along the tree line. And look at these palm trees. I mean, that looks great. Again, let's compare it. I mean, that looks like there's fringing. I mean, it looks horrible. So it's pretty amazing. And I know the day is coming when software is going to do this with just the click of a button, but we're almost there. I was very skeptical with this video, thinking a complex sky replacement like this would work, but it definitely does a better job than I do in Photoshop, and you saw how long I worked on that. So I don't want to spend any more time on this. I think you guys get the point, but that is pretty impressive. The final thing I want to do is I want to see what their skin retouching does, because in most cases, all the skin retouching that I've ever used that's automated looks awful. So here is a shot of you and Neely, and this was shot in the studio. She has amazing skin, so I don't think this is like the best example on how to make horrible skin suddenly look really clean, but let's see what this software does. So for this, I need to come down here to Portrait, and we have Artificial Intelligent Skin Enhancer. So let's just go ahead and bump this up to 100. And let's zoom in here, and you can see we have like the Olin Mills effect where everything looks very flat and glowy, and this looks ridiculous, right? So we don't want to go to 100, but maybe we want to go to 50. Now here, I'm having a harder time. I can see the effect, but it's not so obvious and it doesn't look cheesy. So let's go up here to our eyeball and let's go between these two. And you can see it's definitely adding a glow to her skin. It's still not perfect. Let's really zoom in here. Let's turn this back on and off. So if you've ever done frequency separation on Photoshop, what it appears that it's doing is it's kind of blurring the low frequencies while retaining the high frequencies. So this effect, this skin enhancer, it doesn't seem like it's going to ever remove any of these pores and remove any of the high frequency detail, but it is giving a little glow to the low frequencies, and in many cases that is going to make the skin appear to be a little softer. Sometimes with our digital cameras too, when you're shooting at 50 megapixels with the sharpest lenses, even at 2.8, the amount of detail that comes out of these cameras is so sharp that sometimes you almost want a little bit of blur on the skin. So I think maybe if I turn this down to something like 24, let's see what this does. It's still not really replacing what a retoucher would do, and I know a lot of you guys on our channel are going to want to dig down into this and remove, say, like this little pore pimple and come in here and start fixing. There's some mascara, little flakes that you'd probably retouch out. It's not capable of doing that, but if we zoom out and go before and after, I don't even know if I can see the difference on this effect. Maybe if I go up to 50%. Maybe I got to take it up to 75. If you just want to publish these images, say on Instagram, and people are just going to be seeing them on mobile, and you're uploading an image every day, and you're just trying to build up your audience, it can take a lot of time, and I think you can waste a lot of time going in and just retouching every pore. I mentioned that in the previous video with Pi, that I will go in here and I will retouch stuff that no one will ever see because they're viewing it at this level on your screen. I think something like this can save you a lot of time because this is probably a level right here. I know it's at 73 and that's really high, but this looks really good to me at this screen size. Now, when I zoom in, it looks a little cartoonish. So for somebody who's just getting into retouching, maybe this is a good technique if you just want something fast and easy and you're just going to upload a low resolution image. Maybe you export this out and that file's ready to go. But then if you ever want to print this image large, maybe then you dive in and you go to a little bit more of a subtle effect. But what makes this artificial intelligence is going to be, does it blur out her lips and her eyes? Let's see what this does. If I do the before and after, you can see her eyelashes are still super, super sharp. And her lips, we have lost no detail on the lips. Her hair has lost no detail when I toggle between these. So this software is doing a very good job of identifying, I guess, skin tones. Maybe it's doing something where it's taking a database and it can pinpoint the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and maybe it circles the mouth and feathers it out and it says do not affect the lips, because it's definitely adding a blur right here just below her lip, but it's not adding a blur to the texture on her lips at all. So it is pretty impressive that it can do that. Now, let's take this a step further. Let's go to their portrait enhancer. They have something called Face Light. Let's see what this does. So this bit of software can actually identify the face and only add exposure to the face, which I could see that being really handy, especially if you're a wedding photographer and you just want to lighten everybody's faces, but you don't have time to go into 1,000 images. But I could see where if you could take this software and put it, especially on mobile devices, and you could do this to groups of people. I mean, this technology is coming to tons of other software, so that would be really exciting when you could just lighten up the face of everybody in a wedding photo and not have to go in there and start, dodging and burning one by one. Let's see what eye enhancer does. Let's just pull that up all the way. And it's kind of hard to tell when you're that zoomed out. Let's zoom in and let's do a before and after. So it looks like it's sharpening the eyes and it's bringing out some detail. You can see her brown eyes look a lot better with the eye enhancer. I have this all the way up, and I don't know that I would say that that looks bad. Maybe here in a minute I'm going to get to a point where it's all a little too much, but slim face, this seems interesting. Let's pull that way down. Whoa, no way. That looks a little crazy, but look at that. It's like a liquefy for the face without having to go in there and actually use the liquefy tool. And this one's going to be really controversial to people, but it's done all the time in commercial work. So I like Neely's face. I'm not going to change it, but let's do Enlarged Eyes. Wow, what in the world? Oh my goodness. Look at that. I think that might be a little cartoony, but I wonder if I could... Okay, when I zoom out, maybe that's a little much. Maybe that starts to look a little alien, but let's just take it down to like 37%. Let's do the before and after. It just like opens her eyes a little bit. I'm gonna leave it. I don't know if I should. That's a wild effect. Eyebrow improve. Let's see what this does. Let's go all the way up and look at that. It's like it burned in and sharpened the eyebrows. I really like that effect. Again, maybe it's like a little too much. I think being subtle with these effects is really what's going to make it powerful. I think I'm going to bring down the face light. I think that's part of the problem here. Face light's a little much. And I think I'm going to go back to my skin enhancer and I'm going to bring that back to like 29. That looks pretty good. Let's go back here and see what else they have. Lip saturation, let's take this up. She does have some lipstick on, but you can see it's really muted in the original picture. But if I bump that up, it adds some lipstick. The redness, I don't think I want it to be too red. It looks a little over the top. It's pretty nice. And then teeth whitening, I mean, her teeth are, goodness, they are as white as you would want. But let's just see what 100% teeth whitening does. I mean, it's definitely blowing out the teeth, but I think this is kind of a polished look. Like if you had to print an image and use it for advertising, the retoucher would probably do this. So I don't know that that's the worst of things, but it's pretty wild, all of the different sliders you have here in Portrait Enhancer. So if I zoom all the way back out and hit before and after, it's pretty amazing. I don't know if I'm more amazed by this one or the sky replacement. The sky replacement did a better job than I can. This, I could definitely do this in Photoshop, but I don't know that I could do this as quickly as I could just using these sliders. I mean, this makes things really easy. Again, of course, this isn't replacing high-end retouching. There's things like the little bit of saliva here. I would love to remove that. I don't see a way that you could possibly do that. There's other things like tan lines. I would probably want to smooth out the tan lines on her skin. You know, I think the way the light's hitting her lip here, I would probably want to retouch her lip here a little bit. And then, like I said, maybe some of the mascara and this, you know, little pimple here that everybody has. You know, it's impossible to have perfect skin all the time, although she's pretty dang close to it. You know, I can see where you definitely would probably still find a need to do really deep retouching. But again, if you just want to be able to do something quickly, I mean, I think they need to make this for the phone app. I think that's really where the future is. If you could import this image in and then do something on your phone and then boom, publish it to Instagram, this is going to be I'm going to go ahead and say it, this is going to be very, very common in the next year or two. Everybody's going to be doing this, and it's going to come down to taste. How far do you push it before it starts to look ridiculous and cartoony? But when I zoom out on this image and I think this is what it would look like on my phone, to me, that looks like a pretty polished image. And when I look at the before and after, I do like the little bit of extra light on her face. I do like the skin retouching and softening. I like the lip punch. And then the eyes, I mean, the eyes are actually changing the shape of her eyes, which is pretty wild. So there you go. I don't know what to say at this point. Is this true AI? Is this like machine learning? Oh, one thing I do want to do, let's find out. I guess their idea is that I should be able to take this look that they call it and apply it and batch it out through a bunch of images, and it should be able to do all of these adjustments on multiple images with the click of a button. So what I am going to do now is let's come over here, scroll all the way down to this whole photo shoot. Let's right click and select them all. Let's come down here and I think I can hit sync adjustments. Let's see how well all of this portrait enhancing does on multiple images that I've literally not even looked at or touched. Will that make them better with the click of one button? Here we go. That looks pretty good. Let's see what the before looked like. And for an image like this is just kind of a cute animated image. I kind of like the cartoony, like it brings out the eyes a little bit more. I mean, I think you could do, there's people who do photo shoots where they exaggerate the facial features in an image like this. I think that works really well. Let's look at this image because this one is a little more natural looking. I mean, look at her mouth. It just makes everything pop so well. Okay, so this is the first image where obviously it has to change the shape of her hand in order to change the shape of her eyes. But you can see, again, I don't know that you would ever look at this final image and be able to see the discrepancy there. It doesn't look like a liquefy tool has been pushed in there. This would pass. I mean, you may not ethically think that this is something you should do, but it doesn't look horrible. It actually looks pretty freaking good. It's kind of scary where this stuff is going, to be honest with you. And this was the argument I made in that video with Pi, is that right now we're fixing skin and we're changing eyes and we're whitening teeth with, you know, just a slider. At what point can you take an image like this and change the lighting setup? When can you change her skin tones? When could you potentially shrink her hair down or make her hair bigger? It's probably going to be in Luminar 5, you know? So at the end of the day, oh my gosh, who is this software for? I think this is for amateur photographers and photographers who are just starting to get into high-end editing and they want more possibilities. There's no doubt that this is more powerful than any tool I had 10 years ago. And it's so much easier to use than trying to learn something like Photoshop where I'm going into, you know, layer masks and, you know, doing all that crazy stuff. This is definitely a big leap forward if you're just trying to get your feet wet. But at the same time, this also, Luminar 4 plugs into Lightroom and it plugs into Photoshop. In fact, I can come in here, look at this. I can come up here to filters. Here's Skylum software, Luminar 4. I can click this and it's just gonna throw this image right there into Luminar. So if I needed to edit a picture and I wanted to do really intense skin retouching or something, but then I want to do a quick sky replacement, I can see where this is just part of my workflow. It doesn't have to be a complete software that replaces everything that you're used to. You can plug it in and use it exactly as you like. So this was pretty interesting. If you guys want to get your own copy of Luminar 4, what's nice is you can download this and try it out absolutely for free. I wish they would make an iPhone app for that, because that seems like where this would really be pretty wild. If you can just take pictures on your phone and then apply these settings right there on your phone and upload them to Facebook and Instagram. Pretty big game changer. But if you want to try getting your own copy, definitely head to the link below. If you want to learn how to do super intense skin retouching and sky replacements in Photoshop, head over to fstoppers.com/store, where we have full-length tutorials from some of the world's best photographers. They go really, really deep into post-production and they show you exactly the tools that they use. I know Elia Liccardi in many cases uses Luminar. And if you want to get all of the Sky files that Mike Kelly created that you can then plug into the Sky library here on Luminar, definitely check out Mike Kelly's Sky library, because not only can you learn some replacement techniques there, but you can also get 200 royalty-free raw files that you can put into your own images. So I'd like to know your opinions on this. Is this the future of photography, or is this completely ruining photography and making it digital art? You let me know in the comments below, but I gotta get out of here. Artificial intelligence in photography, at what point are we not even gonna be hitting the shutter? Probably sooner than you think.